want to hit on at least one of your late round picks in fantasy. Because if you can find a diamond in the rough after round 10, your chances of winning in fantasy skyrocket. Simply put, it would be hard for your friends to keep up with you at that point. So the question becomes, who are these players in 2023? Well, I'm happy you asked, because these are the 7 must-have players you should target after round 10. And it begins with the Bears running back Khalil Herbert, who, look, this man was great in 2022. Herbert was a top 10 running back in terms of efficiency. Yes, he was basically a top 10 back when he touched the ball last year. Top 5 on the ground as a rusher, and when you factor in his receiving yards, so his total yards per touch, he was 7th amongst every single RB. This was 21% better than Saquon Barkley last year. All right, now here's what you need to know. David Montgomery is no longer with the team. He signed a 3-year deal worth $18 million with the Detroit Lions. And now this is important because in 5 career games without David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert averages 13 fantasy points per game, and between his receptions and rush attempts, 21.4 touches per game. Now this last stat about his touches, 21.4 per game without Montgomery, is important because it shows that Chicago has trusted Herbert to carry the full workload. Now the Bears did replace Montgomery this offseason. They signed Deonta Foreman and drafted a rookie in Roschon Johnson. And we can start with Deonta Foreman, who signed a 1-year deal, as you can see right here with the Bears, for just $2 million, and there's only $1 million guaranteed, so he's not even 100% to make this roster. They're not actually incentivized to use him all that much. And Foreman last year, he had a couple of big weeks because he was scoring like 3 or 2 touchdowns in a game, but other than that, he wasn't efficient. He was outside the top 30 running backs on the ground and 43rd in yards per touch. This was 27% less efficient than Khalil Herbert. And as for Roschon Johnson, the Bears took him in the 4th round. He is out of Texas. Roschon led all college running backs in missed tackles per attempt since 2020 and produced nearly 6 yards per touch last year. So Roschon's gonna have the best shot to take some work from Herbert, but he's still just a 4th round rookie, so he hasn't even proved it in the NFL when Khalil Herbert through 2 years has. So grab Herbert and then get this next wide receiver. And that would be DJ Chark, who is now a Carolina Panther, the former Detroit Lion. This offseason, Chark signed with the Panthers, and it's a pretty good deal. It's not like a $2 or $3 million deal. It's $5 million for this year with the Panthers. And based on where he goes in fantasy drafts, he's a steal. The 194th overall player as the wide receiver 71, which is interesting because he might actually be the wide receiver 1 on this team. His competition right now is going to be between Adam Thielen, Terrace Marshall, and Jonathan Mingo. Those will be his biggest threats for targets. And as for Adam Thielen, he kind of fell off a cliff last year, which makes sense because he's 33 years old now, but he was 88th in wide receiver efficiency. There's Terrace Marshall, who I think is a nice, bigger athletic receiver for the red zone, but hasn't really showed it through 2 seasons in the NFL, just 85th in winning against man coverage last year. And then you have their 2nd round pick from this year in Jonathan Mingo, who a lot of people thought maybe this guy was a 3rd, maybe a 4th round pick. They took him at the early 2nd round, so maybe a bit of a reach. He's more of a project, but really athletic and does have some upside. Now here's what you need to know about Chark himself. He was actually efficient in 2022 because last year on a per target and catch basis, he was good. Top 10 in yards per target and 7th in yards per reception. And more importantly, when he was actually healthy, he was a strong option. Chark played 8 full games in 2022 and averaged 10.8 points in these contests. Now that production, almost 11 points per game, would have actually finished as a top 40 receiver last year. But despite that, Chark's still going in like round 15 or 16 of drafts as the wide receiver 71. So target DJ Chark and then grab this next quarterback. And that would be Kirk Cousins, who's currently drafted as the 12th quarterback off the board. And Cousins has quietly been a quarterback 1 in fantasy, a top 12 quarterback that is in 3 straight seasons. Now he's coming off of a career year because in his first year with Kevin O'Connell, his new coach, Cousins was top 10 in efficiency, number 4 in passing volume, and number 5 in passing yards. And as you can see from an Ian Rappaport tweet right here, Kirk Cousins, according to the Netflix documentary Quarterbacks, he was hurt all of last year or half the year with a rib and back injury that nobody even knew about or documented, so that probably affected his play, and he was still a top 12 QB. And not only the injury, but it was hard for him to grasp the playbook according to what he said in the documentary for the first month of the year. But now Cousins is healthy with upgraded weapons, like 1st round pick Jordan Addison out of USC, as you can see right here. They're going to swap out an older Adam Thielen who is inefficient with this new and improved rookie. And Addison is arguably the best route runner in this rookie class outside of maybe Jackson Smith-Njigba, and in 2021 alone, he had nearly 1,600 receiving yards on 100 catches, so he knows how to be productive and get open. So the simple translation is that because of Addison, you can expect greater efficiency from Cousins in 2023. So here's your takeaway. Kirk Cousins is now healthy in year 2 of a Kevin O'Connell offense that saw them throw the 3rd most in the league last year with the 2nd most red zone attempts. That's good news. Expect similar volume and more efficiency heading into this year, so get Cousins in this next RB. And that RB's name is Antonio Gibson, the Washington Commanders RB. He is now a major value because you can often get Gibson in round 10 or 11 of your fantasy drafts. He often goes outside the top 100 picks as the running back 35. And this offseason, the Commanders are hyping him up, saying that they want to get him even more touches touches, especially in the receiving game where he thrives the most. And Gibson is also hyping himself up, which is good that they're in alignment there. It seems like there's some positivity going on in OTAs in the start of camp, because he says he wants to showcase his overall skill set, that he hasn't shown his true ability, which makes sense because he came out as a wide receiver hybrid, but he's mostly played running back. Now here's the deal. Gibson is coming off of his least efficient season. Last year he finished 36th in yards per touch, which isn't good, but it's also not the worst. If that's your worst career year, that's pretty good because he's usually an efficient RB. But we also must point out that he was dealing with injuries. In November, he ended up fracturing his foot, and he played the final month to 2 with a fractured foot, and then also having a knee sprain on top of that in December. Now, despite this, Gibson was still more efficient than his teammate Brian Robinson, and reminder, Gibson is a passing game weapon. Only 2 RBs had a higher receiving grade in 2022 than Gibson, Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell. And like I said, coming out of college, he was a hybrid receiver type of running back as well, and look, in his final year of college, he had over 700 receiving yards on just 38 receptions. He was dynamic. And he's also extremely fast because he has a top 1% speed score. So if we can start getting him some more touches, especially in open space like the receiving game, yeah, this guy is an extreme value outside the top 30 RBs. So we know he can catch, and he's also 228 pounds, which means he has the RB fantasy cheat codes, meaning he will earn targets and has the ideal size for red zone touches. Right now, Antonio Gibson's an absolute steal in drafts as the RB 35, so target him and this next rookie. And that rookie out of Tulane is Tanjay Spears, who is now the Tennessee Titans RB2. And earlier this summer, the Titans GM actually spoke on Spears, saying that he has a 3-down skill set. He's a guy who can basically do it all for us, and you can put him in any game situation, which is high praise. Right now, you can get Tanjay Spears as the 171st overall player on average and the running back 57, so that's like round 15, and here's what you should know. Simply put, according to Player Profiler, Spears was dominant in college, averaging 31% of his team's offensive production, so like the yardage, the receptions, the touchdowns, all the production. That's more than Saquon had in college. And this led to him having a massive final year. He had nearly 1,600 rushing yards, over 200 receiving yards. I mean, this guy was pushing towards 1,900 total yards in 2022 alone. And he finished off his career strong. Spears earned over 125 yards in his final 8 straight games of his college career. Now, there are some concerns. As you can see right here, something that Ian Rappaport reported, that is Spears has torn his ACL in one of his knees twice. So he has no ACL in that knee. He's getting some arthritis, and he's lost cartilage in the knee. Now, none of this sounds good, but actually for this year, it's not the worst thing. Because as you can see from Sports MD Analysis, a doctor on Twitter, he kind of points out the stuff that we said. A cartilage loss is not that good, but here's the last point I want you to focus on. Number 4, he says in the short term, the next 1 to 2 years, it's likely to be fine, but fading anything after that. So for this year and next year, it's no big deal. He's somebody we should target. And now with DeAndre Hopkins heading to Tennessee, they have Treylon Burks, Chig Okonkwo, Ryan Tannehill's now healthy. That is an efficient offense building up. And even this guy, Dontrell Hilliard, averaged 7.5 yards per touch as the running back 2 last year on the Titans, which now Spears will slide into that role, a chance to be really efficient. So Spears will be a great option for you in round 15 as the running back 57. So grab him and then this next wide receiver. And that receiver is going to be Tim Patrick, who has basically been forgotten by everybody. Right now, he's currently going in round 18 of fantasy drafts as the wide receiver 87. So a lot of your leagues, he's not even going to be drafted, but he's worth a last round pick as long as your league is like 14 to 16 plus rounds long. Look, Patrick is going to be a starting wide receiver for this team. Now check this out. So here's a couple of tweets worth pointing out from Benjamin Albright. He is probably one of the lead analysts on covering the Denver Broncos. He says, yeah, I would be targeting Tim Patrick in your fantasy dynasty leagues. Okay, that's 1 point. But now I got a little bit more interested this offseason. Somebody said Tim Patrick isn't likely to be fantasy relevant. And Albright said, well, if he's healthy, he's going to be the wide receiver 1. And now that if he's healthy part's important because he tore his ACL in August of last year. He's an aging wide receiver, going to turn 30 this year. But look, that's like 12, really 13 months until week 1 that he'll have time to recover. For a 9 to 10 month recovery, he should be fine. Now, I don't agree with Albright in saying that he's going to be the wide receiver 1 over a Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, but it doesn't mean he can't have number 1 weeks on this team. And for even more comfort on the injury, Tim Patrick, even though he's approaching 30, we have our Sports MD Analysis doctor saying that he expects him to play unrestricted in week 1, so full snaps, and then be 100% healthy, not limited at all by week 6 or 8 from this injury. And this is good to know because since 2020, Patrick has been a top 50 wide receiver, but now he goes as the 87th wide receiver in drafts. Now, Denver did bring in some new competition because their first pick, it was actually in the 2nd round of the draft. They chose Marvin Mims late in the 2nd round with the 37th selection in round 2. And Mims is a great player out of Oklahoma. According to Player Profiler, his college yards per catch, he's really explosive, over 20 yards per reception in his college career. That's top 6% of all time. But the good news is that this draft pick was likely made for next year, 2024, not 2023, because Tim Patrick has an out in his contract after next year, and he'll be approaching 31 to 32 years old. So likely this will be his last year in Denver, which means that for this year at least, Patrick is still going to be involved. So take Patrick late if you're in a deeper draft before people realize he's back, and then get this next asset. And that would be the 2023 fantasy blueprint if indeed you want to win your league. league, this is what you'll need. And this blueprint will have all the tools and analysis you need to win your league, like our top 255 rankings. You can see somebody we talked about, Antonio Gibson. He's my 84th overall player. He goes on average at the 130 position, which means I'm 19 spots ahead of consensus. This is just like 1% of the tools you'll get in this kit. Now, if you want to get access to the blueprint and join the thousands of others who are already utilizing it, well, just click the link in the description below and follow the 2 simple steps. And pretty simply put, it's just $5 for the whole year. Not just for your draft, but I'll help you every single week of the year up until your fantasy playoffs and your championship. And if you don't make, for some reason, your fantasy playoffs, well, I'll just refund that $5, making this 100% risk-free. There's no reason not to at least go ahead and get the tools. So grab the fantasy blueprint down below. And before we get to the number 1 must-have guy after round 10, put a star by some of these honorable mentions. We'll start with the new Carolina Panthers quarterback in Bryce Young, who currently goes in round 15 of drafts. Now, I believe Bryce Young is the latest quarterback in fantasy drafts who can actually finish top 10 because the dude has job security. He was the number 1 overall pick, and right now he's already going to be the starter for this team. And he has a sneaky good environment around him. He has a top 10 offensive line, and he has strong and reliable weapons. And those weapons are across every position. Efficient running backs in Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard. We've talked about some of the receivers when we talked about DJ Shark, but Adam Thielen, although he's older, he's reliable in the slot. Some maybe hidden upside in Mingo. And then at the tight end position, you actually have Hayden Hurst, who is reliable. He didn't get used all that much last year, but that's because there was guys like T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Jamar Chase he was battling. So I do get a little bit confused when Bryce Young goes 24th overall, but Anthony Richardson is going 11th overall. I understand the major rushing upside, but he has a lot of risks that Bryce Young just doesn't have. Another honorable mention is Leonard Fournette, who is still a free agent and will sign with a contender later this offseason, which means he's going to join a good offense. Now, despite this, Fournette still goes as the running back 61 in round 17 of fantasy drafts, and here's what you need to know. Fournette was definitely less efficient last year, which we'll touch on in a second, but he was still productive. He was number 12 in running back points, 4th in RB targets, and he had over 1,200 total yards. Now, in terms of Fournette being inefficient, this was a tweet that he put out on December 26th last year. I hate when people are on me just talking, saying I'm out of shape, etc. Don't you understand that I'm playing with a Liz Frank injury in my foot and can barely push off on it? Through the grace of God, I'm going to keep proving you all wrong. You can see he got a little bit adamant there and he's frustrated, but if he's playing with a Liz Frank injury, yeah, that's going to ruin your efficiency. A lot of guys don't even play through that. Now, there's still a chance that he could join a team like the Cowboys or the Chiefs, which makes Fournette somebody who is a hot commodity in round 17. And then one final honorable mention before we get to the number 1 guy you have to have after round 10, and that's going to be Michael Carter as an honorable mention because, look, the case for him is simple. In his rookie season, he finished as a top 30 running back and was literally 13th in efficiency, averaging 5.3 yards per touch. And then, of course, last year, Breece Hall, a much better running back, a higher draft pick, comes in and takes the workload, but once Breece Hall went down, Carter started to produce again. He had over 10 fantasy points and 15.6 points in week 8 and 9 without Breece Hall. But then in week 12 on November 27th, he had an ankle injury, which ended up missing some time, and he was never 100% again. Now, Breece Hall is expected to come back week 1 right now, but they might slow him in, which could give Carter more work or even the full start for a couple of weeks. And even in every game that Hall played, Carter had at least 8 touches, so he has value either way, making him somebody who's worthwhile as the running back 65 off the board doesn't even get drafted in most leagues. All right, now for the number 1 guy that you must have after round 10 of your drafts. And that would be Jerome Ford, who is the Cleveland Browns running back, who right now goes in round 15. Now, here's what you need to know about the new RB2 in Cleveland, Jerome Ford. D'Ernest Johnson left the team this offseason. He ended up signing with the Jaguars on a 1-year deal. And Kareem Hunt isn't expected to return to the team. Now, this leaves Ford as the RB2 behind Chubb, which is key because over the last 3 years, the running back 2 for the Browns, not just Kareem Hunt, anybody who has been in that role, averages 11.4 points on 10.5 touches per game, which would rank 27th amongst RBs in 2022. 27th amongst RBs, but the interesting part is Jerome Ford goes as the running back 59 right now, the 187th overall player in drafts in like round 15 or 16. Now, last year, the Browns drafted Jerome Ford in the 5th round despite having 3 running backs under contract. This shows how much they liked him, and it's hard not to because Ford can simply do it all. He has great size and speed. He had over 1,500 yards his final year of college, and he's a capable pass catcher. And the team is already impressed with him because the Browns running back coach already says that Ford can do anything and everything in his now 2nd season. So make sure to take him and some of these other players that we talked about before your buddies do. So these are some players that will help you win your leagues. And if you want to see 7 players that nobody wants, but you should in 2023, well, check out this video right over here. And double check that you hit the subscribe button and notification bell on this video so that you can be aware of all the other videos coming out so you can smack around your buddies this year in fantasy.